We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Very excited to be here. If you are just rolling in, let us know where you're coming from in the chat. Drop us in where you're coming from, what city, what state, what country, and maybe tell us what the weather's like, or what you're doing this weekend, or something you're excited for summer. Just let's see what everybody's doing, because I think we're all excited that it's summertime now. Feels like it was a long winter. But I'm really excited to be here with Lindsey to talk about the science of good management. What does that actually mean? How do we prep managers? How do we prep frontline managers? How do we teach management? Because it is a teachable skill. So super excited to have this conversation, because I think it's something that gets neglected quite often. And I'm sure you see this a lot, Lindsey, but managers are often just kind of thrown to the wolves and told to start leading the team. And they don't really know what to do, or they're given like a resource package and they're like, read this, now go be a leader.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. So before we jump into things, though, I'd love to do some introductions so you actually kind of know who we are and what we're talking about and why we should be talking about this. So if you joined these webinars before, you know who I am. My name is Noah Warder. I'm the head of people over here at Gusto. I love talking about people and culture. I love talking about recognition. And I generally just love making sure that HR and people practices are getting better and are moving forward and are actually supporting individuals in their jobs to have the best experience possible. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lindsey to introduce herself and all of the awesome things that she's bringing to the table today.
Great. Thank you, Noah. Thank you for having me here. It's so good to be here. This is my favorite topic. So thanks all for joining. So my name is Lindsey Nehls. I'm the co-founder of Elevate Leadership, and I'm an executive coach. And prior to this chapter, I was an executive at Fortune 50 companies where I helped scale teams. I ran turnarounds. I sold companies. I ran about $1 billion in sales. And if there's one thing that I learned, sometimes in a painful way, if there's one thing I learned time and time again, it was that who you work for is everything. And it really does determine whether we love or whether we hate our job, or whether we go home feeling energized or defeated. For me personally, it was my mental health. For 15 years now, I've suffered from anxiety and depression. And it really, it traces back to 2008. And the factor in it all, what caused it originally, was how I was managed. So I founded Elevate Leadership to help managers be the kind of manager they would want to work for, because management is absolutely learned. It is not rocket science. It's about doing the small things and doing them consistently. And we at Elevate, we inherently believe people are well-intentioned. We just need to help them. So let's do it.
I love it. And you're right. 99% of managers want to be a good manager. They don't want to be the micromanager. They don't want to be the asshole the person who is doing the job that nobody wants, or no one wants to be the boss that everyone hates. No one wants to be that. Right. And so let's start the conversation with let's level set a little bit of what is good management? What does it mean to be a good manager?
Love that, Noah. Yeah, great idea. Well, let's also, since we've got lots of people here from all over, I'm looking, a lot of Canadians. Awesome. If you maybe just share, we've all had managers in our life, right? And so maybe just curious, and also Noah, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Thinking about when you think about the people that you've loved working for, that also really got the best out of you. You really felt like you were doing great work. You were happy doing it, right? You were fulfilled. What did those managers do? How did they behave?
Yeah, I love that. Let's drop one characteristic, one characteristic in the chat of a manager that you loved working for. What's one thing that they did? What was the characteristic? How did they make you feel? Let's all hear it. And so I had a great manager at one of my past lives. I'm actually going to talk about when I was still in hospitality, when I was still running restaurants, working in that different age of my life. But one of the owners of an Italian restaurant that I worked at, one of the things that she did that was really, really good is that she allowed room for creativity and mistakes. And mistakes in a restaurant cost money. So when you screw up a food dish or a cocktail, you got to throw it out and make another one. And margins aren't big in a restaurant, but you were never really penalized for that as long as you learned from it. It didn't happen again. So she allowed that space for creativity and mistakes, which was so important for myself as
Yeah.
like our bar manager to be creative in those ways. And I think for, her brother did the same thing in the kitchen. He allowed his chefs to do the same thing, to be creative and make mistakes, which was, I thought, a really interesting thing, especially in the restaurant industry where that's usually not okay.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's huge. Yeah. It sounds like, I'm just seeing in the chat too. Yeah, it sounds like she, as other people are sharing her too, like really trusted you and empowered you, right? To be creative, to make mistakes. There was a sense of, I'm hearing, yep, other important areas. Empathy. Yes, absolutely. Partnership, respect. Absolutely. Trusting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are great. Yeah. So one of the things just to help, like, I think of what makes a good manager in three buckets. When I think about some of the best managers, what are when I think about like what they do, a way to sort of think about that is sort of three buckets. So one is the ability to manage self. Two is the ability to demonstrate leadership. And three is the commitment or ability to focus on others. So just to kind of click down a little bit. So when we think about managing self, that's really about your ability to manage your own stress level, your own time, to be self-aware, to manage your priorities, humility, vulnerability, those go a long way too. Your self-awareness. So that's all in that managing self bucket. And it's a really key component. And then we get to leadership. So when I think about some of the best managers, I think they really demonstrate leadership. And when I say that, I mean, they're thinking opportunistically. They're thinking about opportunities for their team. They're thinking strategically, right? They're thinking about like what's happening in the industry, where's the business headed, how do I connect the dots for my team? They're really thoughtful about communication, and they're able to navigate conflict quite effectively. And then that third bucket, which is a commitment or ability to really focus on others. And that third bucket is where we think about like developing others and giving feedback, both great feedback, very effective feedback, both on a constructive side and a positive side.
Mm-hmm.
It's helping someone develop their career. It's having empathy, as we've talked about, right? It's building that psychological safety, right? That ability to make mistakes and to feel comfortable and included so you can be creative, right? And then it's about really great managers in this bucket, if you will, really are able to build trust with their direct reports. This has come up too, right? But also across the whole organization. They have really great trusting relationships. So those are really the three areas, I think: managing self, leadership, demonstrating leadership, and focusing on others.
I love that. And I think like it's a nice simple framework, but there's a lot to unpack under each one of those things. And like one thing that I've always talked about with our managers and our leaders is like, I like the concept of leaders eat last. Like your job is to, empower your team, put them ahead of yourselves. When there's a big win, it's the team's win.
Yes.
When there's a big mistake, it's your mistake as the manager to own and make better. Like, and you talk about the mistake and you make sure everyone's getting better, but as the manager, you're owning those mistakes and those missed opportunities. And so I think that is one of those things that I love hearing of, like, the focus isn't on you as a manager.
No, it's not.
Really empowering that team.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest, I think what happens too, particularly for like first-time managers, right, is a lot of people want to go into management because it's that next rung on the ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of too, like when you're managing a team and people are asking to be managed, they want to be a manager, they want to be promoted, right? It is really like you have to want to develop and serve others. Like that has got to be what you really want to do to really be an effective manager and to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And so, one thing to think about too is like, as people, for your own self, right? But really encouraging people to dig in and ask, like if someone comes to you and says they really want to be a manager or they want to get promoted, whatever, it's just like really understanding like what's driving that for you? Where's that coming from? And what do you think that's going to look like? Like, what do you imagine your weeks and your day-to-day to be as a manager? Because I think often what happens, right, is we often promote the highest, like the most productive, the highest producing individual contributor. And often they're incredibly talented at that, but they might not actually enjoy managing.
Yeah. And I think that happens so often. And I was actually just talking to an HR business partner friend of mine in the manufacturing sector about managers. And she's like, they're often just in that role because they have the most tenure.
Yes.
They've never been told how to be a manager. They just know what good production looks like. So they can kind of keep people on task well. But like, they don't know what they're doing.
Right. And then, so then the question is, then how do we really set them up for success? Right. Because the reality is that like that is a good reason, right? I mean, it can't be the only reason, but the fact that someone has such institutional knowledge, that can be such a teacher and a mentor to others, right? Like it's a good business decision. But then if that's not something you just have to teach them. You have to make sure they actually want to help others and do that third bucket, right? And focus on others. But then it's about making sure that we equip them and give them the skills and what good management looks like.
So let's double down on those skills. And so let's talk about what are the skills that, like, we talked about those 3 key areas. And if you had to like pick one, maybe 2 skills that kind of can set up a manager for success, give them, space to make blunders, make mistakes, and, have that growth period, because you definitely need that. You're not just going to be a great manager day one. What are those 1 or 2 skills that we should really be focusing on empowering our managers with?
So I think about, if I were to list, like, if I think about like really the core skills, I think there are really 5 key skills to being a good manager. And then we'll click one so we can really like actually kind of look at what one looks like in practice. But just if I think about the 5 key skills, 1 is being good at performance managing. 2 is having tough conversations. 3 is knowing how to motivate your team, holding people accountable. And number 5 is managing your own stress level. That really is important. If I were to take, like, that's still 5, right? If I were to take 1, often as an executive coach, and we offer coaching, right? And one of the things we often do is do a 360, where we'll interview a bunch of stakeholders and about this person. And it's the ability to get feedback that you just often can't get on your own. And I would say one of the most common themes I see when we do these is that people, they want more feedback from their leaders. They want both positive and constructive feedback. And I would say that is like the number 1 thing that is consistent through all the 360s we run. So I think if there's a skill to really focus on and develop, it's how to give feedback effectively, both constructive feedback and positive feedback. And I guess one thing too, I think, like, just to make it, because I think one of the most foundational things is like trust, right? So I think actually, like, those are the skills that I would really develop, but I also think trust is like, it's so foundational. And you even saw it too when we asked, like, what did people, when they think about, like, what did those managers do, right? Like, and a lot of it was that they had a trusting relationship. They were trustworthy. They trusted them, right? That is the bedrock. So I thought it could be fun, Noah, if you're up for it, if everyone's up for it, is trust, I find, is one of those things that, like, everyone believes is so essential, right?
Yes.
And yet 2 things I would say. 1 is, like, we're not really great about, like, we sometimes just sort of, like, we know it's important, but it's sort of one of those things that we ought to kind of feel like we have it or not with people. And also, we don't really know, like, even if we're like, yeah, I want to have trust with them, right? I'm not sure we always are good about being proactive or really knowing how to be proactive about it, right? So I thought maybe a fun thing to do would be to think about, like, if that's really the bedrock, right, is building trust, then what can we do on a day-to-day, weekly basis to proactively build trust with individuals, with our direct reports, with with people around us. And so maybe too, like, no, if we think about that, like, what I think one of the things to think about too is, like, we sometimes not take it for granted, but we think, like, of course we need trust, right? But I guess if we think about, like, I don't know, if you think about even that, going back to your experience in the restaurant, like, what is it about trust? Like, what if we have trust, why is it so important? Like, what does it enable us to do?
Yeah, I think, I think I'm a big proponent of trust, because without trust, nothing else works. You can give feedback all you want. You can be the most amazing communicator at giving feedback to your direct reports. But if they don't trust you, they're not going to listen to any
They're
of
not
it.
going to listen to any of it. Yeah, yeah.
This
It's not going
person's
to
just
do anything.
talking
Yeah.
nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing about trust is, like you said, is that like people will feel like they can give you and take that feedback because you always have their best interest at heart.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Like, yeah, if there's trust, then people feel like that they will give you and you will give them, right, the benefit of the doubt. You'll assume they're coming from a good place. You'll get curious, right? You'll be like, huh, where's that coming from, right? You'll seek to understand. Yes. And so, yeah, I think it's why it's so foundational. Another thing too, I think about, and if anyone wants to chime in too, like what is it that trust enables us to do? Why is it so foundational? Why is it the bedrock? I think another thing is that in order to really have any sort of like healthy conflict debate, we've got to have trust, right? Like we've got to, that's so critical. And also, I mean, everything is more enjoyable. Work's more fun, everything, right? Like we can get a lot more done when there's trust. So we're not second guessing things. And so the way I often, one of the ways I like to think about it is borrowing actually Stephen Covey's. He's got this great model called the emotional bank account. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
This is new to me.
Okay.
This is great. Awesome.
All right, cool. Yeah. So it's quite helpful. And so if you think about like an emotional bank account, like you think about a bank account, right? We make deposits into our bank account and we make withdrawals from our bank account. So we think about an emotional bank account. We think about us having like bank accounts, emotional bank accounts with those around us, right? So, and so we think about like, okay, well, let's think about now, like, what are some deposits we could make into an emotional bank account that we have with someone on your team? So like, think about someone on your team, right? Like, what are some examples? And please, pop in comments. Is like, what would be for someone on your team? What would be a deposit you could put into their emotional bank account that might help build that trust, right? Nice. Okay. So we've got, yeah, like feeling like you can count on people, right? Like doing what you say, right? Actually following through.
Love it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
great. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Flynn. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, what else?
For me, I think about if I'm depositing into somebody's emotional bank account, I think a big part of that is listening to them without interruption. So letting them have a full thought. And what that looks like for me, and like, I read this book, loved it. It's called Listening to Ignite the Mind. And it's about like letting someone have that minute of awkward silence to finish their thoughts. So they'll say something and then you just sit there quietly for like a full 30 seconds to a minute. And it's so difficult because we always want to jump in and say something. But 9 times out of 10, they'll keep talking because they've been given a moment to think through their thoughts. And so I think that opportunity for them to just fully unload what they want to unload is a big thing that you can do to, build that trust with somebody.
I love that, right? Yeah, just like creating that space for someone and actually like truly listening.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah.
That one from Amy, being honest when you as the manager make mistakes. I love it. I love it. Yes. Let go of that ego.
So good, right? Exactly. Own it. Yep. Absolutely. Active listening, right? And genuinely saying thank you. Yes. Fantastic, right? Like genuinely when someone does something, go and show appreciation and let them know like what exactly was it and what was the impact of that. But yeah, that can go a huge way, right?
Yeah. Recognition is so important. I mean, this is what we sell every day and day in and day out. And we truly believe in the power of it. And so, yes, recognition doesn't have to be this complicated platform. Sometimes it's just saying thank you to people.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. And yeah, showing genuine empathy, right? I think that's great, right? Reliable, consistent. Yeah. I mean, if someone's having a tough time and they share something with you, or you can just tell that they're, I don't know, flustered or whatever, it's just being like, hey, I know you've got a lot, there's a lot going on right now. It's really hard when you've got like, 8 plates spinning, if you will, right? Just showing empathy can also help build trust, right? Having a career conversation, just really putting effort into your one-on-ones. And so yeah, you're getting the point, right? Like we just think about like, how do we make these deposits into our bank account? And the more we understand our people, the more we can really individualize these, right? Like more we learn like, what makes this person tick, right? Maybe someone they actually love public praise. Like they want to be announced. They want that visibility, corporate wide, right? Some do not. And
Oh,
don't try to guess, just ask. Yeah, some really hate that. There's nothing worse. So everyone's a little different. So it's about finding out like what do your people really respond to? What do they love? What do they enjoy doing? Right. So that those bank account deposits can go a long way, right? So the reason we need to be proactive about this, right, and put in those deposits is because inevitably we're going to make withdrawals, right? Like we make withdrawals. So what are some examples of when we think about like as managers, what are some withdrawals we have to make at times, right?
drop them in the comments. But I think when you have to hold someone accountable for missed deadline, like when you got to call someone out for something that they did wrong, they said something wrong, they missed a deadline. That's your job as a manager, as a leader, to call them out and be like,
hey, totally, right? Yep. And you have to give tough feedback. Absolutely, right? You have to have those tough conversations at times, right? Sometimes you're gonna have to ask for them to work the weekend, or like, can you please, like, we need to, like, this is a key client and we're just gonna have to do it, right? Absolutely. Sometimes you're gonna mess up. You're gonna say you're gonna do something and you're gonna have forgotten, or you're gonna gotten too busy and you're just not gonna follow through. Corrective feedback, right? Absolutely, Amy. Yeah, you're gonna have to do it. And so it's okay, all these things, right? Like we have to do them. However, the key though is just like in a bank account, right? If we make withdrawals, but we don't have enough deposits in the bank, that's when we get in the black, right? And that's when that's when you feel the tension. That's when it doesn't feel good. That's when you start to like question what they're about or what their intentions are, right? That's when the relationship really starts to suffer. And so the key thing to think about with this, like why I find this model so helpful is one, it's simple, right? It's actionable. So, maybe anyone who's out there right now, just think about like, and Noah, one of your direct reports can benefit. Just think about someone like that works for you, and just think about for a second, like, what is their emotional bank account with you? So like, what's your standing? Where are you? In the black? Are you in the red? And what can you do? Let's like one deposit you could make this week. So maybe just, if you're listening in, just think about like, let me think about one person on my team and where's my bank account, and let me make a deposit and think about like, what's that one thing I could do?
yeah. And if you feel comfortable, drop it in the comments.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Thank you. That'd be great.
And I will say like one thing that I think I can do, and I hope that I'm my emotional bank account with my direct report is it's in the surplus. But I think one thing that I think is important to people on my team is that ability to be kind of creative, but also learn my process. So like when I've finished a big project, we create a meeting where we do a working session where I just walk through the whole process. This is how I started. This is how I got the stakeholder buy-in. This is how I did this. This is how I did that. And just run through my whole process. And so they can see, oh, okay, I understand how we got to this end point. So giving people insight, or giving them insight into how did we build out our competency framework, or how did we build out our salary bands? And so giving them that insight into, maybe the higher level strategic thinking that is happening at the executive level.
That's so great. That's such a great deposit, right? Because one, it's like, they're you're teaching them, right? You're investing in them. You're also letting them into something, right? Like there's a level of transparency. There's just a level of care that they're like, oh, okay. Because they don't have to know necessarily maybe how it works. But by doing that too, right? Like they can connect dots, right? And like by having that just by being aware of that, they can then be more strategic in what they're doing. So I love that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
We've got a question coming in from Carl.
Great.
Let's jump into this. So again, please, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We'll answer them throughout the conversation. We'll also, hopefully have some time at the end to answer some more. But Carl's asking, any thoughts about the difference between management and leadership?
Great question, Carl. I get this a lot. So I would say the biggest difference between management and leadership is, one, I would say just like when I think about leadership, you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. So everybody can be a leader. And when I talked about those three buckets, right, one of them was leadership. And so when I think about, I think to be a great manager, you also have to demonstrate leadership. You don't have to be a manager to demonstrate leadership. And what leadership is when I think about what leadership is, right? It's about thinking strategically. It's about, and so that's why, like, you don't have to be a manager, right? Like, you could be a phenomenal individual contributor and be an incredible leader, in the sense that, like, you're really thinking about, okay, where, again, like, what's happening in the world right now? What's happening in the industry? What trends are we seeing? As a result, like, what do our clients really need right now? Okay, let me think about how we're going to shape our product as a result, right? And, like, work back into what you could do. So that I think is an example of strategic thinking. I also think about leadership, again, like I brought it up earlier, is like ability to handle conflict. And you run into conflict whether you're a manager or not, right? But how do you really get people to have those hard conversations, to facilitate conflict, is a great leadership skill. And yeah, like, even just to have those conversations. So I think of leadership as really like, anybody can be a leader. And in order to be a great manager, you need to be able to demonstrate leadership. And leadership is really about that managing conflict, really thoughtful communication, like aligning, cascading information, thinking strategically. Whereas management is you're a manager. And that goes more into like those core skills, right? So you manage accountability, you manage performance, you're managing your own stress level, you're developing others. So does that help, Carl?
Awesome. I think that I love that distinction of, like, leadership is part of management, but you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. And then, like, we talk about this internally at Gusto of, like, anyone. It's one of our core values of lead. Like, anyone can lead anything at any given time. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader. And I think
yeah, exactly. And I think also too, in this economy, right? Like, we're just not, it's challenging. Like, we're not, people might want to be a manager, but maybe like the business just isn't growing as fast. Like, there's got to be a business need, right? So I think also when people are coming to you and they want to become a manager, they want, that's a good distinction too. It's like, okay, here's the thing. When I break down what great management looks like, there's 3 components, right? One of those is leadership. Leadership is a skill you can develop now that will make you more effective in your role. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about what that looks like and what are opportunities for you to demonstrate that leadership. So
love it. We got another question coming in from Katie here. So where do you start with someone who has worked for the company for 20 years, most recently in a sales role, and wants to grow into a leadership role, but has no leadership experience up to this point?
Great. It was so good. Okay. Great question, Katie. And maybe this is an assumption. I'm wondering, this is so hard because normally I'm used to asking questions. We can talk live, but I'm just thinking, like, whether it's management or leadership, but let's just say leadership. So I would think about, okay, so it sounds like they've been a great sales performer, and they want more leadership roles. So what I would start with is like, okay, great. Well, let's think about, where do you see opportunity for leadership? Like, when you think about the company right now and you think about what needs to get done for us to be successful, where are some opportunities that you see? So the reason I'm asking this question back to them is, one, I want to find something that they're also really excited to do. And so if they come up with the idea, they're going to have way more ownership. I'm also seeing them in action demonstrate their leadership skills, because they're looking at the company and they're trying to identify, what are the opportunities? Like, what are the gaps right now? Like, where do we need to grow? What do we need to develop muscle? Where do we have to change this, or what have you? So that's one thing, is just really asking that question to find that out. 2, in terms of like creating some opportunities, it might say, another question would be like, okay, so where do you feel like you've been an incredible producer for us, right? And we're so grateful. And like, when you look at, what do you think makes you so talented? That, like, what are some skills that you see that you have that maybe perhaps people have not developed? And what are those? And what's the best way you think people could learn that? And then maybe it's about, like, maybe there's a teaching opportunity. Maybe there's something where like they can actually do exactly what Noah was doing, right? Where they're like walking through, they're running a session, like they're running a little mini sales boot camp or something. Another thing could be too about visibility, right? So maybe it's some all hands or something. They're able to tell a story or a customer case study or even talking about like what happened in this deal and what was it really that might be transferable for others. So those are just some initial ideas, but I would start really by actually asking them questions and find out like, what is it about leadership and where do they feel like where do they feel like the opportunity is, and then create the space for them to go do it. But then they'll have ownership if they kind of help come up with the ideas.
Yeah. So Katie added that it sounds like this person's trying to become a sales manager. So specifically a manager role. But I think what you said is like, you need to flex this muscle before you can step into that management role. And so let's find those opportunities for you to learn this core skill of management.
Yes. And so an opportunity, what I like it as, so now good to know that's about management. So I would say too, like if there's an opportunity to onboard anyone or mentor anyone, like that is a great example of just giving them some exposure to it. And then I think the key thing too is like documenting or like just being clear about what the expectations is. So it's like, okay, let's just talk about what it means to be a manager here. Like how you show up, what you need to do, right? And that goes back into those core competencies I was talking about. And even those 3 categories, right? As a manager, we need to manage ourselves. We need to focus on others, and we need to demonstrate leadership. Like here are breaking it down. Where do you feel like you are amongst these? Okay, it sounds like we need to develop these 3 skills. Okay, great. Let's think about how to do that now.
I love it. Yeah. And I think there is often this misconception of management. Like I actually talk about this of like, you have, like you said, your most senior, most productive IC, individual contributor, who's like, great, I'm going to become a manager. And you're like, okay, but that doesn't mean you're going to continue doing your job.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Whole new job that you're doing.
Totally. I love that too. Yeah. I always say when people want to go into management, or I remember like the first time I managed too, I was like, okay, I actually got an executive coach, which is sort of absurd because it was so early on, but I was like, I knew I wasn't going to learn how to manage from my manager. Like he was an incredible deal guy. He didn't know how to manage. And so I was like, I need a coach. And then, but I was like, because I can tell like, this is a career change. This is not doing the same thing at a different level. I am now being asked to do I have a different career now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think just like making sure people are really aware that like, this is different. Like you have to think differently, do things differently. Just so they're starting to ask themselves even that a question and bring awareness to the distinct change.
Yeah, I think that's so important of like, this is a completely new job and career. Like you're not just like, I always go back to engineers. So you're no longer programming. You're not writing code anymore.
Yeah.
You are helping others write better code.
Yeah. And do you want to do that? Because coding can be fun for engineers. Yeah.
We've got another question coming in from Flynn.
Great.
If you have someone who is recently promoted to a leadership position in the organization, but they are not steering the department very well or ineffectively, how do you handle the situation?
Oh, Flynn, I like it. Well, you got to do something, that's for sure. So don't hope that it's going to change. So a couple things. I'm thinking about like the actual how, right? Just to get really actionable. It depends on your role with them, right? I mean, one is like, just depends again on your role, but having a conversation, right? So first you could even just say like, how do you feel like things are going? Like, what do you feel like is working? What don't you think is working? To try to just get a sense of like, what is their self-awareness of how things are going? Just to kind of check in. Another pathway could also be just is giving them feedback, like letting them know it. And so, I mean, I would say this has to happen. It's more of like a loading order thing, just to kind of get a sense of like, where do they think they are? And so when we want to have that constructive feedback and give that conversation, I think one of the most important things to do is to share your intention. So it's like, hey, ask permission. Like I really want to support you. Like I want to see you be super successful here. And I've got some feedback that I think could really help you be successful. Are you open to hearing it? So one, what's your positive agenda? Because that's going to help with the trust factor, right? You're like, I have your back. I want you to be successful. And you got to believe it. Don't fake that. That's got to be genuine. So find a genuine positive intention and with having the conversation, and then ask. And the reason we ask is that like, you want to enroll them. Like you create a psychological contract and they're like, yes. And they're going to be that much more open to actually having that conversation. And they also may say no, and that's okay because it might be a horrible time for them. And so if they say no, it might just be like, okay, great. It sounds like it's not a good time. When would? Because I really think I feel like I owe you this information. So then you go in and you give the feedback. So actually give like, what are the facts? What's the impact? And then try to understand like, what's the reaction to it, try to get underneath the surface. So, you really do have to you got to have the conversation. They have to get the feedback. You absolutely owe it to them. And as does everyone. You don't have to be alone in this. Like everyone in that organization owes them the feedback. Like, they cannot change if they do not know.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a key thing. And like, I was just in a sort of a community roundtable with a bunch of HR leaders, and we were talking about something similar, where one person said that what they did that I found was really effective in these situations was they only spent about 25% on the feedback of the meeting. And then the next 75% of it was like, now how are you and I going to work together to make this better?
Yeah, brilliant. Yes. How can I help? Right. Like we're on the same team. We want the company to be successful. Exactly. And I think the key too is asking questions, right? Like really try to get underneath the surface. Like, have you experienced this kind of like, I know in previous companies, like you were in similar roles, like what's different here? Have you experienced this before? What, just to like really seek to understand, because at the end of the day, we have to get to the root cause, because solving for symptoms never works, so like just really creating that safe space, letting them know the intention, giving them the facts, and then trying to get under the surface and ask the questions. And just as Noah said, no, like we're in this together and I really want to know how I can help.
Well, thanks for the question, Flynn.
Yeah, thanks, Flynn. It's a good one.
We've got a bunch of questions from Carl. I think they all kind of run under the same vein of like leaders need more empathy, less dictatorial. How can they be inspirational to their teams? When do they need to be more of a coach? And sort of like question around servant leadership and toxic managers. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. What do you like? I think you're kind of touching on this a little bit of like these three kind of core areas of like managing your own stress, leadership, putting others ahead of yourself, and really focusing on the team. Like if they're not focusing on the team, then they're not going to be inspirational. If they're not a good leadership, they won't be inspirational. If you can't inspire, like, again, if you're not managing your own stress levels and you're freaking out all the time, your team's not going to trust you to be able to handle any of their issues whatsoever.
They're also going to freak out. Energy, I always tell, like, I always feel like when you're a leader, it's like you're on stage. Everyone's watching you. And so if you're stressed out, even like they're going to get stressed out. Like they're going to be like, oh geez, what happened? And what happens then, they're like, oh, things aren't good. Or then it's going to be like, what happened today? Like some call not go well or what have you. And then what happens is that as a manager, when we show up that way, people are going to be way less likely to share information with you because they're like, oh, they're having a bad day. I'm not bringing this up today. And then all of a sudden, like information gets withheld. Not in a like, anyone's trying to do something. It's just like, well, I don't want to bother them today. Right. And so all of a sudden you're not getting what you need. And so that's like just another reason why managing your own stress is so important.
I think this one is kind of important, but it's not really the science of good management, but like dealing with a toxic manager, we've all had toxic managers. We've all been in that terrible situation. And I'd say like, let's bring it from the HR perspective of like, as an HR person, how do you deal with a toxic manager in your organization and either, let's call a spade, shuffle them out of the organization, or if there's enough room for improvement, really let's get that improvement happening.
Yeah. It's a great question. So any other what would you say? Is that what you do? It's sort of like those are your sort of like two pathways. It's like.
Yes. I think those are really the two pathways for a toxic manager. Maybe there is the opportunity to move them back into an IC role, because I have had those moments where like the manager's just been completely ineffective. I wouldn't call them toxic. They're just ineffective.
Yeah.
And you have a conversation and they're like, I hate being a manager.
Right. Like this is they're not having fun. Like, yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, I think that is another pathway. And it's my brother just took that pathway. Just like, he's like, I thought that's what I wanted, but I actually hate this. Please let me just go back to being a senior contributor.
Great. I think that pathway actually doesn't get that conversation doesn't happen often enough.
Mhm.
Now, this again, I do think this is like different than toxic, but I do think like just because I feel like we're always like, oh, we can't demote someone. And we also think about it as a demotion. Like it doesn't have to be a demotion. It's really about like, I always think it's about, okay, what does the business need? What are people's strengths and what do they want? What do they want to do? Like, what do they enjoy doing? What do they want to learn? And like, it's about figuring out that recipe. And so
Mhm.
often, yeah, like someone can be in a management. I mean, from just coaching people, I know it's all the time. Like they're the very senior management role. I'm like, it's not what they want to do. And they don't actually want to leave the company. And they're not really great. They're not a great manager. Like they're not doing a great job. But no one's giving them, I don't think they feel like they have permission. And the organization isn't giving them permission to just be a really senior IC. And so I think the more like, yeah, just trying to ask those questions and be like, how much fun are you having? Are you enjoying this? Like what, if you could have any role here, what would it be? Like what, like how come? Why do you feel like where do you feel like you have to be the manager here? What's driving that?
Mhm.
Why? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. And then and then the other pathways of like coaching them, helping them, giving them the resources, sending them to elevate to get, the resources they need to become a better leader and manager. And then, there are going to be those times where the situation is irredeemable.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and they need to exit the organization. And for whatever reason, maybe it's not a good fit. They're not driving with the values.
Hmm.
Um, there's been too many burned bridges with their team that you just can't fix that quickly. And so, there's lots of reasons, but I think I'm trying to spin this from the HR lens of like, I think those are three pathways that you can take. And, doing that 360 feedback will kind of help you figure out which pathway to take, having the conversation with the manager, having the conversation with their leader, and then just, figuring out what would be best for them and the organization. I think that's
Yeah,
key there.
exactly. Yep.
Cool.
Great.
We get another one from Flynn. Well, I'm loving all these questions. These are great. Keep it coming. Do you have any tips on getting people on the same page as far as departmental vision is concerned? I think this is a great thing around leadership. How do you get everyone moving in the same direction?
Yes. So yes. Okay. So let's see. Do you have any okay. So if we want to get everyone in the department, getting people on the same page as far as okay, so the vision, right? So I think a couple things there, a couple ways to tackle that, right? Because it is so important, right? We've all got to like be aligned, understand it, and ideally understand your role within that vision. Like what are you doing to move that vision forward? So one thing to do, I mean, I guess the question is like, ideally also like you can encourage people to help develop that vision. It's like one way to like really get people on board with it is that they are a part of that. That's not always the case, right? Sometimes visions are cascaded. I think another tactic too is really actually tackling this one by one, or at least if you know that you get a sentiment that like people are not really on board with this or they're not, it's just actually like going and talking to them and sharing the vision, asking like, how does this resonate with you? How doesn't it resonate with you? Like trying to figure out, because also sometimes like visions are somehow you have to like attach to that vision, right? And you have to find your way into that vision. And oftentimes we can like read something or see something and we might not believe it, but maybe we don't really understand like what's behind that. And so people do need to they need to find something in them that connects. And so I think sometimes that's more productive. Just having a conversation and just pulling someone aside and one-on-one and really like unpacking that with them. So that can be another way to do it. The other way can be is actually like using other people to get people on board, meaning like maybe it's actually as the leader and the author of the vision, maybe it's actually not best for you to necessarily always be the one who's like spouting the vision. If there's people who have like, maybe they don't have authority in terms like influence as an authority because they don't have like this very senior position, but maybe they have a ton of social capital or they've been there forever or they've seen this vision in action, like they've seen the impact of it. Then having them tell that story to the team can be really impactful. Or also going around the room and everyone sharing like what is their relation to the vision? What do they see? And that will give other people ideas. So anyway, Noah, anything you'd add?
No, I think like I kind of look at this as like the same way that you build culture and you look for those cultural champions in the organization who help you drive as a people leader or manager, those initiatives that you're trying to get off the ground, because If it's always just coming, like you said, from the one person, people just start tuning you out.
Right.
Cool. And we got another one here. This one's very, I think, tactical, but we'll be holding a manager training. Any tips on having our managers bond together?
Yes. I love that. Great. No, you probably have some good ones here too.
So if they're going to be in the same room together, like physically in the same room, improv. Find a local improv company and have them run a 1 hour improv session with your leaders. We did it at Gusto. It was amazing. It was so amazing that we did it with our whole company at our offsite. And so we had a lot of people coming into that session being like, oh God, what am I going to have to do here? And then they all came out being like, that was the best part of the offsite, was the improv session that we did.
It's such a good skill to develop. I mean, it's a really powerful skill.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, it helps you develop skills. It helps you develop psychological safety. It helps you kind of remove some of your barriers because you have to in front of other people. You become a little bit more vulnerable and you just get to be silly and laugh for like 45 minutes with a group of people, which is very, very connecting. I think that's something that we do not give enough value to, is just laughing with each other.
That's so true. That is a great one. That'd be like if you're running a training and that can be like a catalyst event, it's sort of like kicking it off. That could be great. If you need some recommendations that are a bit more, succinct, concise, right? I think there's a variety of icebreakers. We actually do this at our all hands, which is kind of fun. Like every all hands we just have an icebreaker and they vary, right? So it can be like, and also you can think about like, how connected how much, depending on the depth of vulnerability you're asking people to share with the icebreaker, you just have to gauge that depending on the just how well they know each other. But obviously you want to kind of like create that opportunity for people to be more vulnerable and learn. So a very sort of maybe more surface level could be like, if you owned one t-shirt and you had to wear it for the rest of the year, what would it say? What would the one word be on the t-shirt? Something like that, right? Like pretty if you want to go like another, like a much deeper level one that I've found to be great is having everybody share what you get the best out of me when, and I'm at my worst when, or you get the worst out of me when. That can be really telling. And then the best thing too is like to model it. So get someone on the team who first like is willing to be vulnerable. That's a comfortable space for them. Or also as the leader of the team, like go first and really push the envelope in terms of like sharing something. Because that will just give permission to everybody else. Doesn't mean they have to share that and be that vulnerable themselves, but it gives them permission to be vulnerable.
I love it. Love it. We've also done user manuals where everyone fills out sort of the same thing. I work my best at this time. I'm my worst at this time. Here are my like typical work hours. This is how I like to communicate. This is how I like to get feedback. And then it kind of ends with like, here's one weird, interesting thing about me that you probably didn't know. And so you just get a little insight into people's background as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like that.
Flynn, you just keep coming in with all the questions. I love it. Do you think that having direct report in geographically different locations has special challenges? If so, how do you navigate those?
Okay. Yes. Great question, Flynn. Yes, we're so many of us are dealing with this, right? In terms of distributed hybrid teams. So I think that it can be it's challenging if you assume that you manage them the same way that you manage someone who's right across the way. You know what I mean? So I think that you have to think about, you have to manage differently when you're managing a distributed team, but I would say you always have to manage differently. We can never manage any situation, people all the same ways. So, and I think the key thing is like, if there's one thing that like, what do you do? Like, how do you manage them differently? I think you just have to be way more proactive. Because there aren't those like run-ins. Also, if most of your team is one place and someone else might feel a bit isolated because they're the one remote person, like, again, like you have to be more proactive. So I think like the biggest thing, if that's the case, is like, okay, think about that emotional bank account's a great thing. Like, what am I doing? Where is that relationship stand? If you don't know, then like, you're not being proactive enough. Like, so you're going to have to check in with them more. You're going to have to do more one-on-ones with them. You're going to have to, maybe assignments won't be like so long, right? And you have to think about like, what are some rituals? What are some ways to bring people together that kind of overcome space, if you will. Those are my thoughts. But what do you think about any ideas, Noah?
I think you like right on being exceptionally proactive when people are in different locations, and like Gusto is completely remote. We're fully distributed. The other thing I would say is like, if you have the budget and the time and the space for it, is like trying to have those moments where people are in person, whether it's on a quarterly basis or biannual or annual basis. Like the biggest piece of feedback we've gotten from our offsite was that people are like, I just feel so much more comfortable asking people for things because now I know them a bit better. Like it's just like now that we've met face to face and I got to just like have that unstructured time with them, I just feel so much more comfortable asking them things. So creating that opportunity, I think, is also super important to build that sort of camaraderie. As much as I love remote work, I'm a big proponent of remote work. Nothing beats some in-person, face-to-face like interactions.
Yep.
Cool.
Nice.
I know we've got about 10 minutes left. And I think we still have more that we could talk about for sure. Flynn, I see you got another thing, challenging to treat people fairly, equally. I will say one thing to that point of like treating people fairly and equally is that fair is not always equal, especially when people are distributed. So what one person needs is not the same as what another person needs. That doesn't mean it's not fair. And so if you need to give more time to one person to have them be successful, that's okay. If they need a bit more accommodation to be successful, that's okay. I think of like classic examples of like parents versus non-parents. Parents might need a little bit more flexibility in their schedule so they can do, school drop-off, school pickup, running kids to things. Does that mean they're not getting their work done? No, it just means that they have to get it done at different times than other folks. Or the developer who would prefer to be programming at 10 p.m. at night instead of, 10 a.m. when most of the team is active. Like I think it's creating flexibility for folks. And that means treating them fairly, but not equally.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's also one of the most important things like that great managers do. That's really important is recognizing that you have to understand your people and you have to flex your management style depending on the needs of your team, of the individuals on your team, their skill level, their will level on certain projects. Like you really have to flex as a manager. And the more you really get to know and understand your people, the more information you have so that you can show up in a way that best serves them. And I think a really like one thing I find too, where people often think they have to do like the same for everybody, happens to be in one-on-ones. It's like, I have weekly one-on-ones with everyone. Well, I don't know if you need to, maybe you don't need to have weekly one-on-ones with everyone, and that might change. And it doesn't mean that like someone's getting more attention or, you just have to look at it and say like, well, what makes sense for us, right? Like, what do they need? What do you need from them? And maybe actually because you work with them all the time or they're working on really, I don't know, a certain kind of project that just doesn't require, maybe like every other week is fine. Whereas someone that you don't see, then maybe once a week. So I just think like really not thinking that you need to show up in the same way to every person and giving yourself permission and challenging yourself to be like, okay, how can I show up in a way that best fits this person and what we're trying to accomplish together?
Yeah. And when if you're working on the front line, you've got like teams in different factories or locations. It was like, again, what does this location need versus this location? How am I going to go to those managers and help them versus this place? And, just kind of tracking the things that are happening there. Like this place has high turnover. I got to go there. What's happening here? Assess it, have those conversations. Maybe you got to put a little bit more focus there for time being. And then kind of go back and rearrange things. But I think it's really about like being flexible, figuring out what people need for that moment in time and doing what you need to do there.
Yeah.
Cool. And we've got about 5 minutes left. So Lindsey, if one thing, let's end this with one thing.
Oh, one thing.
One thing that people can do to help their managers, empower them, like go away from the session. What's one thing that they can do to really help their managers be a bit more successful?
I think one thing they can do is make sure people understand and have clarity around what expectations do you have? What does great management, what does management even look So break it down and find out where they need support, and then you can come up with a plan to kind of close those gaps and help them. But like anything in life, like you have to know where you're going to get there, right? Or you've got to, and I just think sometimes we just aren't, we're too high level. We're not granular enough to be like, we expect as a manager that you manage performance, that you develop your people, that you build trust. I mean, whatever it is, it doesn't need to be a whole laundry list, right? But like, what are the key things you really want your managers at your company, given your culture, your business strategy? What do you need them to do? And I think that's like, that's just such a fundamental piece that I think sometimes we just don't, doesn't need to be perfect. Just giving direction and clarity will be really helpful.
I love that. Yeah. And I like that you pointed out that like what works for your company, your culture, because it's going to be different. Like if you're a tech company where you have fully remote people, it's going to be very different than what it looks like if you're in a manufacturing or healthcare setting where your managers are on the floor with their teams every day talking to them. And so different strategies for different sort of situations. Yeah. Great. So we got a couple minutes left. Lindsey, I know that you wanted to share a couple of resources. I know Connor's going to drop a couple of links for everyone in the chat. But if you want to just give a little like what's that all about before we kind of
So I want to give you a little gift. I was taught that like you don't ever go to someone's house without like bringing something. So this is our thanks for inviting me over. And so for everyone, Connor's very kindly just going to pop a link in. And what is that link? So what I wanted to give you guys is I had given you the emotional bank account. And we actually produced a really short video on that. And so now I've given you that video. And when I say we, this is Elevate Leadership, just sort of like to stand back for a second. So we offer coaching, live workshops, and micro learning. And so I'm giving you an example of our micro learning. And what this is probably the thing I'm most excited about right now is because it's called Elevate Academy. And what it really does is it enables you to help your managers learn and develop, because it's got these short form videos, like 5 or 10 minutes on the most critical management skills. And then each class has a discussion guide and a facilitator guide. So you can gather people together and run training and or just even have a conversation about it. Like there's a discussion guide. And so it really helps empower you to be able to empower them. And so also another note too, is that once you go into the link, you'll see in the upper right corner, you can actually just have a free trial for 2 weeks. So watch the classes, like also feel free to gather your direct reports and use the discussion guide and share the information. Again, like we're here to help. We believe very deeply in what we're up to. And we really want to help managers be the kind of manager they would want to work for. And we know it can happen. It is learned. And so that's just a little gift, a little take home to help you on your journey. Awesome.
I love it. It's great. You can fully connect with myself or Lindsey on LinkedIn if you have any other questions or comments, or, I highly recommend checking out Elevate Leadership. They're doing some awesome stuff. If you have any questions about recognition, obviously you can talk to us here at Gusto. But again, Lindsey, thanks so much for your insights, your knowledge, and helping us, maybe we can change a few managers to be even better after this session.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Noah. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. We're ending 1 minute early, which is perfect. So I hope you can all take a minute and get some more water before your next meeting.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.